There you go. So welcome to our event today, which is Yale Alumni A2A, meaning alumni to alumni event on leveraging the power of social media. So this event is presented excuse me, to you from Yale Club of Oregon, First Gen Yale, as well as Careers Life and Yale A2A subcommittee. So a little bit of housekeeping announcement after what you see us struggling for the last 20 minutes here. So this platform of Zoom allows you, those online, to be able to see and hear our speakers, as well as be heard and be seen. On the other hand, if you decide to sign on in your pajamas or have a Bloody Mary as an eye-opener on the West Coast, please take yourself off the video. And mute yourself until you're ready to ask a question. So this is actually a multimodality event because in the room we have 10 people in Portland, Oregon, which is beautiful all morning. And these are my friends and colleagues, Yale alumni, as well as my colleagues from the Portland IPA, who have been our great partners in the past, and also my colleague from Providence. I wanted to first introduce our speakers, and then I'll talk a little bit of a background about this series of events. So we have two great speakers today. First is Christina Avellan. Hi. Yale class of 2010. Christina lives in Portland. She's a behavioral therapist, consultant, researcher who has been able to leverage her skill set into several career pivots and transitions. She conducts career counseling and coaching to help those building their skills or looking for change, and currently serves as a researcher for Walmart's e-commerce team. She holds a BA from Yale and an MA from NYU.
Good morning.
Our other speaker is Ben Mones, online from LA. Yeah. Ben is a CEO and co-founder of Pharma Technologies, an AI-based startup that helps companies limit brand and culture risk by screening publicly available online content. Ben has startups in his blood. He's held executive roles at software companies in digital media, logistics, and wearables. Ben has been a guest lecturer at MIT Sloan, UCLA Anderson, and USC Marshall School of Business, and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Fast Company, TechCrunch, and the Los Angeles Times. He holds a BA from Vanderbilt University. Ben actually grew up in Portland, yeah? So
That's right.
Yeah, welcome. So
good morning, everyone.
A bit of background. This is actually our third Yale Club of Oregon co-hosting with the CLY A2A subcommittee on kind of career mentoring. On February 25th, we had our kickoff event, which was co-led by Rob Greenlee, whom you'll hear from, as well as Nick Fleming, who is one of our local alum, entitled Leading Your Life and Career, Telling Your Story with Your Resume. And our second event was in June, where we did a guided speed networking, co-hosted by Christina and Nick Fleming, as they taught us how to do speed networking, and then we actually did practice roundtable short speed runs, and that was super fun, and we all learned a lot. So this is our third in the series called Leveraging the Power of Social Media. And we will hear from Ben and Christina on the market as well as recruiters' perspective, employers' perspective, and candidates' perspective. I want to kind of lead in with my own struggle with social media as an organizer for this event. So, I thought this is a great topic, social media, right? After all, our country is being run by incessant tweets, our great president. So, I did my usual Eventbrite setup, and we use our email distribution channel to reach our local Yale alumni. And then I started doing my timid posts in the Yale Alumni Facebook group, which now has 21,000 members in it. And we got to 14 attendees, and we got stuck there. And I was so anxious. I was thinking, well, 14, I can't really cancel this, but that's really doing a disservice to our great speakers and their work. So then I started leveraging my network and my social media friends. So next, I want to introduce everyone to Lisa Chapman. Lisa, wave to people. So yeah. So
can people see me? I can't see myself. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can see you. So Lisa is the immediate past chair of the AYA Board of Governors. She is one of this year's winner of the Yale Medal, which is the highest honor for a Yale alum volunteer. She is the chair of First Gen Yale, and so she helped me grow the registration from 14 to 82 today. So Lisa, how did you do?
Hey, Cheyenne. Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Cheyenne is my Yale alumni sister, friend, and my actual personal mentor. And I thank you for the opportunity to help you out, as always. I think the trick is, I like to think of it as 3 Ps: positioning, posting, and personal. And let me just say what that means. When I was an early banker at Citibank, my clients were advertising agencies. And there's a guy there named Jack Trout who coined the phrase positioning in the mind, which basically you want to create an image in your mind. So when you hear something, you actually see it, you feel it, you understand it. So a webinar, in your webinar, I wanted to get the idea so people would somehow put together the topic with the importance of the webinar today. So positioning is one thing. Second is posting. So you did that with the original graphic. I actually took that graphic and I posted the graphic with some short keywords. I also made it personal, my third key, which is highlighting my friendship and great relationship with Cheyenne. So it wasn't just an advertisement, it was my personal connection to you, Cheyenne, and to Yale Club of Oregon, Southwest Washington, Careers Life in Yale, and posting the event. There's actually, so connected to this strategy, you all should know that there are over 400 Yale groups in Facebook. And I actually connected to them when I was chair of Yale Day of Service in 2012, 2014. So I tried to figure out who would be the most likely groups, or what would be the most likely Yale groups who would like to be part of this webinar this morning. So, obviously, First Gen Yale, we're honored to be a sponsor. Yale Women, Yale Alumni, Yale Alumni Leaders, Latinos, Yale Black Alumni Association, and all the various SIGs, both interest groups and identity groups, as well as several Yale classes, especially the younger classes. So that was the strategy. The overall is impact. The overall is how do you get the word out so that people will want to be part of it. And with 82, it's a huge success, and I'm really proud to help you. If there's one more fourth key I'd like to throw out, so again, it's positioning, posting, and personal. You guys want to just remember that when you do your own social media work. The fourth key I'd like to add is posting after the webinar. So after this webinar, I've actually been taking photos myself. I've already just posted it on Yale Alumni, which is 21,000. I posted it on First Gen Yale. So I posted kind of Cheyenne getting ready to actually go live with this to also excite people again. I also included the Zoom login. So following this, there'll be some more storytelling about what the webinar was like, some quotes from a couple of the key participants, from the two leaders, and again, the webinar is important in and of itself, but also the after story is equally important, if not more so, because this will be archived and people can then go look at it at their leisure. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. Would you like me to introduce Nancy Stratford? Is she on now?
I'm looking at the list. I don't see her. Maybe go to Rob then.
Okay. Cheyenne, is there anything else you want me to cover in the introduction?
No, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah. So I also want to introduce a couple of my Yale AYA board colleagues. Rob Boonley is the chair of the A2A subcommittee. Rob, do you want to do a couple of pitches or tell us about some upcoming events for Yale alumni everywhere?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cheyenne. First of all, let me just say A2A Alumni to Alumni is set up to help our fellow Yale alumni through career and life transitions. So it's alumni helping alumni, and it's a pilot. We're still experimenting. This is part of several things we're trying over the next year, and we're looking at things that will be in buckets like the first act of your life and your career when you're first graduating, or the middle everything, act 2, where you're juggling life and family and other things, and then the third act of what's next as you wind down your career. We're also looking at buckets of categories of life skills, career focused, and more introspective programming. So November 1st, our colleague Kevin Winston of Los Angeles will be hosting a Yale Entrepreneurs panel on tech careers. And that's going to be live streamed via the Yale Tech group on Facebook. Again, that's November 1st, I think it's 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific. On January 12th in New York City, actually, I'll be presenting an introspective program in person on leading your life and career on purpose. And then in early January, we'll have another career-focused program for women as they are transitioning through different life and careers stages. And I just met with Jennifer Madar of the Board of Governors. Work in progress. I see that Susan Linham, chair of the Alumni, is on the line here. So part of what A2A is looking forward to is to do a lot of partnering. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rob. Susan, do you have any Yale Women events you wanted to promote here?
I have to find how to unmute myself. Yale Women is the SIG for all Yale women alums from Yale College and the graduate and professional schools. And Jennifer Madar is our vice chair and is the officer liaison to our committee that hosts our webinars. So I think that's probably one of the things she talked to you about, Rob. We are having, we have about 20 chapters around the world, and they host a variety of events that are all posted on our calendar. And we do a lot of work by social media, especially our Facebook group, which is a closed group. So I can't, unless you're a Yale Women alum, I can't refer you to it. But it is a rather robust forum of information and discussion. I am probably the oldest person on this call and the least technologically proficient. So I am really looking forward to learning a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Lisa, you wanted to add something?
Oh yeah, thank you, Cheyenne. I just thank you for the opportunity for Susan to promote Yale Women. I just wanted to promote our next event for First Gen Yale. It's open to all Yale alumni and Yale students. It's our 3rd annual career networking mixer on Thursday night, November 8th from 7:30 to 9:30. It's at the Afro-American Cultural House. All alumni can drop in, and basically we have the opportunity to share our careers and life journeys with students. We have about 200 participants every year who come. It's cookies and milk, so it's light refreshments. The students love it. So if you're on campus or you're in the area, please drop by. If you want to sign up, go to firstgenyale.org and you can see the Eventbrite RSVP. You can also sign in at the door. So thank you for your support and the opportunity to promote our next event.
Yeah, thank you. I did that last year. I really enjoyed it. Also on the phone are some of our past and current board members, Wendy Maldonado D'Amico and Alvera Duran and Magda Vergara. So so let's start with Ben then, finally getting into the content of our talk. Please.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you not only to Xiaoyan, but to the entire Yale community for dialing in this morning or attending out in Portland. I know Saturdays are precious, especially Saturday mornings, afternoons, and evenings. So once again, thanks to everyone for taking the time and for Yale inviting a Vandy alum into the community here. So I appreciate it, and I'm really happy to be here. So as I was introduced, I'm the CEO of a tech company actually in Los Angeles. And really what we do is we help large businesses understand and identify the sorts of problematic behaviors that lead to problematic outcomes across the employee life cycle, things like workplace violence, sexual harassment, abusive behavior, all by analyzing publicly available information. So I'll talk a little bit more about how that plays into the employer's perspective, but Xiaoyan asked me to speak a little bit around sort of the overall job market, how employers are really thinking about their job candidates today and existing employees at the company. So I thought we'd start with kind of a job market overview, dig into sort of the recruiter's perspective, why recruiters are really turning to news, web, and social media to answer some of these questions, not just around risk, but trying to identify the sorts of employees that will contribute to not just a safe and welcoming workplace, but to some of the company's diversity initiatives or CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives. So a lot of what we'll dig into today is not just the risky side of it, but also how employers look at things like volunteering, helping others, donating, that kind of thing, and how you can use your personal brand to drive all that up. So no secret right now, if you've been following the news, although there's a lot to pay attention to these days, the job market is the best it's ever been, actually since 1969. And there are a few ways to kind of chop up these numbers with different perspectives, but the overall is that more and more we're seeing more job openings and fewer job seekers. Oregon specifically, we're seeing record low amid an unusually tight job market. If you look to the right over there, that's the unemployment rate actually since 1965. So you can see obviously spikes more recently with the financial crisis that we had here, recessions over the past few years, but employers are finding it harder and harder to begin to identify who the right people are for a business, not just because the market is tight, but because they're getting fewer and fewer quality candidates coming into their job workflow and their job application process. So moving right along to the next slide, not just the overall sort of market, but how our, there we go, one back there. There we go. How are employers doing this today? They're looking at things like job experience. They're looking at internal referrals from within their network. They're also looking at cultural fit. And this is the really interesting question. And I don't mean to say that we're scraping the bottom of the barrel or anything like that when it comes to new hires and employees, but it's becoming harder and harder not just find someone who's qualified, but find someone who in today's economy is a reflection of your mission and values as an organization. Things like misogyny, abusive behavior, racism in the workplace, these are things that are unacceptable to a business, both for creating a safe and welcoming culture, but also ensuring that from a brand standpoint, consumers have so many options now. If I'm Papa John's, for example, or Pizza Hut or Domino's, Papa John's has been in the news a lot this year for reasons related to a racist CEO, a toxic culture, racism in the workplace. If I have my phone open and I'm a consumer, I can decide, do I want to go to Papa John's, Pizza Hut, Domino's? I'm going to choose Pizza Hut or Domino's now because the pizza is pretty much the same, depending upon how you look at it. And I'm going to look at the moral and cultural values of the companies that I purchase from. So that's really what a lot of employers are considering now as we get to kind of a certain degree of parity with the candidates that are applying for certain jobs. now we're in a position where how is this person either going to extend my mission values as an organization, or how are they going to detract? And how are people doing this? They're looking at employee referral. They're looking at internal hires. They're looking at social and professional networks. But really what I want to talk about today is this new layer. It's not just looking at resumes. It's not just looking at how many years of experience or the types of quantitative or qualitative attributes that someone brings into a business. But the final question that employers are beginning to wrestle with now and struggle with is that question of, will this person contribute to my community professionally in a way that is demonstrable of what I want as an employer for that person to really exhibit. So it's not as if we're talking about a 1984, like we want everyone to look the same type of thing, but there are questions around if we can control for these issues related to workplace violence, sexual harassment, why not? Why shouldn't we dig into the data that surrounds us? So as we go to the next slide here, the challenge for recruiters when identifying these issues is that background checks, they're bouncing around, but there we go. So background checks, these are things that I'm not sure how many employers here are in the room. I'm sure many of us have had a background check run on us. This is actually still a very manual process. There's a great, if you're a fan of the show, John Oliver, a great segment on background checks and the inaccuracy of data there. So you could always go and Google that following today's session. But so many background checks, actually more than 50% of background checks are stored on pieces of paper at county courthouses around the United States. It's not like a master database somewhere, but there's a huge amount of manual review. And ultimately, a background check is examining the negative, as we like to say, meaning that a background check looks at what someone hasn't done versus what they have done. So looking at the absence of information to draw a conclusion about what will happen is a challenge for recruiters, right? Interviews now, there's huge amounts of technology with interview coaching, resume writing. There's actually artificial intelligence that will write resumes for job seekers so that they can actually go out there and create a resume that looks like it's a reflection of the ideal candidate. So employers have to kind of cut through that noise. Reference checks, these are things, I'm sure we've all provided reference checks to employers. When's the last time anyone provided a reference check that wasn't going to say something glowing about the person or give a positive thumbs up about who that person is? So employers are answering this question of how can I, go about figuring out this person is going to reflect what I want, what I'm looking for. And the costs are real. We put sort of the cost of toxic employees up on here. These are data points. You can always feel free to reach out to me if you're a little bit interested in how we come up with some of these numbers here. But these are, cultural impact that's having a real, not just effect on culture, but also on shareholder value and all that good stuff. So getting into it now, what we do, and just jumping on to the next slide here, is we look at publicly available information to help employers kind of answer some of these questions. We apply AI. We actually know what violence looks like on the internet, bigotry without the racial slur, the homophobic slur, sexism. We've actually trained artificial intelligence to identify somebody saying something sexist online, whether it's in a message board, news, website, the comment section on a news article or something like that, or social media. So, don't want to focus too much on what we do, but really, kind of more on the data. We're an LA company, about 40 employees, venture backed. These are some of the businesses that, we're working with today. And, why, how has this kind of practice jumped up over the past few years? If we go to the next slide here, we can kind of show you what I'm talking about. But if you look, it looks like the graphic got a little bit messed up here, but what this is showing is the overall rise in the practice of social media screening over the past few years. And from a job seeker's perspective, what we want to communicate is that, in 2006, there were only 5% of employers that were looking at social media when making a hiring decision. 2006 was pre-Twitter, pre-Instagram, pre-Snapchat, just the beginning of LinkedIn. Facebook was just beginning to roll out to universities around the country. Very few businesses were doing it. 2014, that number jumped up to 45% of employers. 2015, 60% of employers. And in 2016, 70% of employers are using Google, Facebook, Instagram in one way or another, looking at job candidates online to determine if this person is going to fit inside of my company because of that challenge that we alluded to on the previous slide around the various problems that recruiters are facing when trying to answer some of these questions around employability. This was a famous tweet. Justine Sacco was somebody who was a VP of marketing who tweeted that on a flight to go meet a client. And by the time she landed, this tweet had gone viral. She had actually lost her job. So she was somebody who created a huge amount of risk, not just for herself, but she's got on her Twitter account, I work for company X. The brand is now represented. Consumers came together. They boycotted, started saying, hey, look, what we're going to talk about today is that you really are your own brand. And the composite of individual brands inside of a company, the composite of individuals makes up the broader ecosystem of what that brand really looks like. Existing employees too, EEOC studies, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission came out with a study that said 30 years of sexual harassment training has had no measurable impact on preventing sexual harassment or workplace bullying inside of large companies and large enterprises around the United States. So it's very hard to begin to dial in and remediate this problem. And that's really, what FAMA set out to do is identify that on behalf of companies. So what we do at our company at a very high level, moving on to the next slide here, and we won't dig into it too much, but we want to communicate to you guys how employers are doing this today. What companies do is they actually configure, and all of this is consent-based, so everybody signs off on this. They know this is happening. But companies can configure their criteria and say, I want to look at violence, bigotry, abusive behavior. I might want to see how somebody has talked about my company, how someone has talked about the industry, how somebody has appeared maybe in donating, volunteering Habitat for Humanity, which I remember I used to do when I was going to Calton Gable over in Portland. I would go to Habitat for Humanity every weekend, and if only I had social media at the time, maybe I would have gotten into Yale instead of Vanderbilt. I could have posted that on my Facebook, and maybe gotten into an Ivy League school instead of the Ivy League of the South. But I'm just saying, I had a great experience at Vanderbilt. But look, this is what employers are looking at today. These are the things that they care about, right? So being able to think about your brand as an extension of the employer's brand, and what would that employer look for, you can begin to determine that sort of thing just by looking at their website, right? So if I'm applying for a financial services job, I might be promoting different types of content than I would if I was applying for a job in finance. But what FAMA does is we basically filter out all the information that's extraneous and only pick out what's relevant to a consumer, or to an employer, excuse me. And if we go to the next slide here, you can see it's not the huge portion of the population here. So for all the reports that we run, we've actually run about 20,000 people on a monthly basis. 10% of reports that come back have some reference to bigotry. So 1 in 10 people have some reference to something racist, homophobic, misogynistic, etc. 9% with references to illegal drugs, 4.5% with references to excessive violence, and 1.5% to another type of illegal activity. So employers are doing this because there's verifiable information out there that they are missing in other parts of their application and recruitment process. So I would, it's very difficult. I think I always say nobody who's racist actually thinks that they're racist, or homophobic thinks they're homophobic. They're only standing up for what's right. So I would, encourage everyone to kind of examine their own point of view on those sorts of issues. And even if as a joke, if you like something on social media or say something on social media that might demonstrate one of those types of behaviors, something to really dig into and look at. But that really concludes the sort of employer's perspective. I guess what I can say is consider the mission and values of the company that you apply to, and is your online brand and identity, in the same way which you might say in an interview, a reflection of what that company considers acceptable and not. So with that, I think I'll be available to answer questions, of course, at the end here, but I think we want to go to Christina now. So.
Oh, well, Ben, I have a question for you, because I'm curious about the 2 active terrorists that were uncovered. Can you, you signed an NDA or something, but I'm just curious if you can talk to us a little bit more about that, and how your company was able to intervene in that situation.
Yeah, sure. So when we say active terrorists, what that means is people that are promoting terroristic causes, whether that's ISIS or anti-Western behavior or the other sorts of identified terror groups around the world that the, different, whether it's the CIA or State Department have identified as terrorist organizations. We work with a lot of multinational conglomerates that range from some of the largest oil companies in the world to large professional services, the biggest banks in the world as well. And they have offices throughout the globe, here in the U.S., Canada, EMEA, throughout Asia, Latin America as well. And they identified that there were people that were promoting terroristic causes and not necessarily, committing a terroristic crime, but people that were beginning to aggregate with terrorist networks on the internet, and that's what we identified on the company's behalf. So yeah, we do have a responsibility to identify that and report that to the State Department when we find it, but also to begin to report that to the employers, obviously, as well. But I can't imagine there's too many terrorists who are on this chat today, so hopefully I have nothing to worry about here.
But we'll find out, won't we?
Maybe. I don't know. I hope not.
Thank you, Ben. Fascinating, really, really cool stuff.
I think maybe let's do questions for Ben now, and then we'll also have time for questions at the end. So why don't we jump in?
We have some on-site questions.
Okay.
I had a question for you about political profiling. So I'm just curious, like, I try to be really careful about what I post on, say, can believe it's legislation, for example, that passed or something. Because of all
Can you speak up? Can you speak up a little bit? I'm sorry, I'm just having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Walk to the camera. Yes. Sorry about that. I was just having a little trouble hearing you.
So my question is about the political posts. So you talked a bit about like bigotry and criminal records. But what do employers look for that? Are they even allowed to consider a hiring decision based on where you stand politically, based on what you post or respond to on social media?
Yeah, it's a common question, especially in the new world of far left or far right and personality and identity politics and all of that. So the answer is no. You cannot make an employment decision on the basis of someone's political affiliation. If you look at the Civil Rights Act, actually of 1964, which governs information that can be used in an employment decision, it limits disability, age, pregnancy, gender, sexuality, that sort of thing from being used in an employment decision. So if someone is making, now I don't know if you're a government employee, if you are a government employee and you're talking negatively about the President of the United States or any governmental figure, they can actually fire you for that. That is in 100% grounds for them to be able to do that. But as far as a private corporation is concerned, if they were able to draw, you are working for like a left or right action committee, a political action committee, and you were promoting a point of view that was anti that group's mission and values or that group's business sorts of goals, then they could potentially use the information. But by and large, no, you can't use political affiliation. Now, that being said, in the climate in which we operate, there are many hateful and bigoted things that people say that might be tied to a particular candidate or set of policies or governmental employee. So if those two things are weaved together, then that's a slightly different story. But simply saying, I disagree with, the recent immigration policies, or I disagree with other sorts of topics that are populating the national media, or agree, that can't be used in a hiring decision. So.
Wes, you have a question?
Yes. Am I?
Yeah, or maybe so.
Oh, I can come back here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was one of my questions. I've got two more that are very closely related. One sounds very similar in some ways to how a background check or credit report or those things would be done. So one part of that would be, if a negative report comes back, is that possible for the individual to see what was contained within that? Or is there a possibility for an individual, either as like a political candidate or something like that, to say, hey, I'd like to request my own information just to see what that is? Or if something bad about me. I know I've had the experience, I traveled a lot to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and some places, so every time I go to the airport, at least a few years ago, I'll be stopped. So is there any way to rectify if something online has been badly reported? So that's kind of related to each other. Here's a question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it sounds like you have some familiarity too with employment law. So, and I'm sorry, what was your name?
Oh,
Wes.
Wes Morgan from West Oregon.
So what Wes is referring to in the background screening process is something called the pre-adverse and adverse notification process. So without getting into too much dry detail and start listing out a bunch of acronyms, the Fair Credit Reporting Act was created in the 1970s to essentially govern third parties that are compiling public data on behalf of employers or credit bureaus that those people use to make hiring, benefits, or credit granting decisions. Because the information is so inaccurate, because it's stored on pieces of paper around the country, you could imagine, like a consumer, your life being essentially decided by the wrong information of what's out there. So employers do require, and you have to, give the candidate an option with a background check and the checks that we're talking about here, 5 to 7 days, depending upon the state that you're in, to contest the results that come back, to either explain them or say, hey, that wasn't me, or these results are incorrect. So you do have the option. An employer will actually have to send you a pre-adverse notification letter, it's called. Some laws vary by state, but an adverse notification letter is what follows if they decide after you contest that the results actually hold up. And insofar as requesting a copy of your report, if an employer has run one, you do get the right to see it on that employer's behalf and see what's out there. But you can submit and ask to just see what it looks like online, but there isn't a legal requirement to be able to do that. There is a legal requirement if the report has been run at any point by any company to request a copy.
As a political candidate, can I request my own just to see if I've got any dirt?
Send me an email, 100%. Yeah, we could do something like that.
Do we have any other questions? Anybody online have any questions for Ben?
I have a question for Ben. This is Elvira.
Hi, Elvira.
Hi. Hi. So
Hello.
Some job candidates have been told that if they apply, their company might ask them for their login information for Facebook or other social media. Is that legal?
That is, depending upon the state, it is illegal to do that, I believe, in 19 states around the country. And it is considered a very, very, very bad practice. It's something that, we always recommend. We don't do it. We'll never ask for a username and password. It is using private information in making a hiring decision, which is also illegal. You can only use public information when you're making an employer benefits granting decision. So in about 19 states, it is illegal and considered a bad practice in all other 31 states around the United States.
So if someone is asked for it, what would be the best way to decline it if you still want the job?
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not at all. So I'm not this is not legal advice. This is just, sample what I would suggest and what I would say. I would take a look at the legislation that you're in at the state. You can just Google that question. They're, asking for usernames and passwords. And I would also say that, from a more non-legal standpoint, that, if there's anything you want to know about me, I'm happy to cover it right now, but I don't feel comfortable showing you what's happening in my personal life, especially because you're going to see a lot of things about me that I feel could be protected, whether it's your name, whether it's your, gender, or anything that might be protected about who you are as an individual that you feel shouldn't be used in a hiring decision. So, that's what I would say, and push back on that for sure, because you definitely have ground to stand on, not just from a legal standpoint, but from like a what's right, and correct standpoint. Do you want to work at a company where they look at everything about your private life? We're talking about social media that's public, what people have codified in the public sphere as being normal. The stuff that's private really should sit outside of all that.
I would just say, would you want to work for a company that was asking you to do something so questionable?
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah.
I wouldn't, but for a while, a lot of healthcare companies were asking, let's say, nurses and doctors for that. So that's why.
Yeah, that was happening for a while. It was. That was a common practice until a lot of states enacted legislation against that.
Any other questions online? I thought I saw a hand up. Go ahead, Lisa. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Lisa. You're muted.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have a quick question. It seems that when you just sort of look through Google or Yahoo or the other ones, and you kind of search for people, it seems like some people actually scrub their accounts. There's nothing on them. Nothing. They disappear. And I'm wondering how people do that. How do people become gone? And I know people.
You and Wes, huh? Running for office.
know someone in my town who was able to scrub some information and actually scrubbed his whole profile through all the social media, through everything else about him. And I'm wondering, how does someone actually go and do that? Or do people get paid to actually be sort of detectives and screen and clean people's public profiles?
Yeah, so there's a whole field of, it's called online reputation management, of people who go in and actually do that on behalf of individuals, where, you can look at companies such as Brand Yourself or Reputation.com, where there are services that will actually go out there and do it, or you can just be very intentional on your own about how you scrub your own identity.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, Ben.
You got it.
So now, what does this mean for you as an employee, as a job seeker, or just as an individual and not an organization, right? And I want this part to be really conversational because I want you guys to have an opportunity to get the information that you are most looking forward to. But basically, to kind of summarize some of the things I've been saying, you are your personal brand. We live in a really exciting time where we don't have to separate ourselves so much and be robots at work. But this is an interesting gray area, right? So overarchingly, using your judgment, thinking about before you put everything that you put on the internet is public. You operate under that assumption, right? And so before you put anything out there, think about what your brand really is. And this is where I usually start with job seekers or with the people that I career counsel, is thinking about how do you define your own brand? So what are the things that you carry over into your professional life that are your personality, that are your strengths? And whenever you're going to post something, thinking for a second, does this conflict with any of the other things that I put out there? So as Ben was saying, sometimes if you work for a political organization, it makes sense that you would politically post about things that are going on in politics. But again, if you work for a liberal organization, maybe you shouldn't be posting things that go against the values of your organization. So just always taking a moment. We don't need to be afraid in this time of life where so much of our lives are public and visible. And there is a lot of gray area between our professional selves and our personal selves. That's actually okay if you learn how to harness it correctly, right? But it does require an extra step before you put anything out into the world of, does this align with the values that I'm promoting as what my values are? So one of the biggest things that I want to get across today is how important networking is. And in a previous event where we talked about networking, my perspective on it, and this is my personal opinion and what I do in my sphere of influence, but again, we can debate about it if you like, but my personal opinion is that when you are thinking about networking in the past, that word comes with so much connotation. And I know that sometimes networking is thought of as a very transactional thing. Basically, I need something or I'm looking for something and I'm looking for key people that will show me the right way. The perspective I'd like to offer, and I'll get into how that ties into social media today, is networking is something that I consider pretty holistic. So when you think about networking, I like to think about it more in the terms of community building and looking for supports that are not necessarily completely people that are in your field, but rather people that you think are going to enrich your life, both professionally and personally, with interests that other people have, with things that they are also doing. So thinking about networking, first of all, as a little bit more holistically, and something that you're doing as you are just building a large support system around you. And so we're going to get into how that translates to social media. Oh, okay. So a big part of this is when you are putting yourself out there on social media and in the world, thinking beyond your skills and experience. So nowadays, your resume is really something that lives online. We're going to focus very specifically on LinkedIn today. And that's something that also, if you have questions about other social media platforms, I'd love to also talk about that. But I like to focus first on LinkedIn, because for the job seeker today, your resume, that one pager that was traditionally what was used when you apply online or you send in your cover letter, that is not really the only entry point for you as a candidate. And I like to, even if you have and are very comfortable in your career, I think we are all job seekers at this point. We are all developing our brand. It doesn't matter if you've been at a company for 10 years or you are currently in between jobs and looking for another opportunity. You're always building and perfecting and enriching your brand. So that's one mindset that I'd like to shift. I know that traditionally sometimes you sit down and you redo your resume when you're actually looking for a job, right? But now with the advent of social media and LinkedIn specifically, you have a living document that you're basically always working on all the time. And the big thing about this is that, and it's fun for some people, it's terrifying for others, but it's such a more creative and flexible pursuit now than the average, I'm going to write out these bullet points of what I've done with my skills and my experience. Your personal brand is about beyond that page, outside of what you've done and what skills you have. What makes you great to work with? What do you bring to the culture of a workplace? As Ben was saying, the cultural fit is becoming more and more important because there are a lot of qualified job candidates out there. What sets you apart is really those things that make you someone fun to be in the room with. Not necessarily fun, but also you don't have to be fun. Let me just put that out there. You don't have to be fun, but you can bring a lot of subjective traits to a work environment, and that is something that you're now being judged on. So thinking about what are your personality strengths is something that is just as important to convey on an online profile as your skills and experience. Did we have a question? Yeah. Oh, okay. So one way to convey this is thinking about posts and content. So we've talked about the danger, right, of the posts and content that you could put out there. But let's talk about how that actually can work for you. So like I'm saying, recruiters are not just looking for a robot who can come in and get the job done, right? That's why we all haven't been replaced by robots at this point, right? So when you're thinking about posting and the content on your profile, think about the things that you are interested in that, again, align with those values and that of your brand. So if you're interested in marathon running, and that has nothing to do with your job, that's not something that you need to hide or that you shouldn't post about, because that also shows the depth of your personality and your skills and interests that go beyond what your resume is going to say, and that make you an asset to a company and also someone that other people want to work with. So thinking about not just the trouble you can run into with posts and content, but thinking about how you can bring yourself to the world. One of the ways that you're going to be able to do that now is through social media. So thinking about it that way is something that I like to kind of shift people's mentalities about. Any questions on that before we move to the next slide? Wes.
Maybe, I don't know, how about holistic? I really love the holistic approach. All parts of myself.
Yeah.
But if I'm interested in as an active pacifist or someone with political interests that are non-traditional, maybe it's a combination of different economic and political systems that could be considered controversial. Can I still bring my whole self, or how do I balance that?
That's a really good question. That's an awesome question. And I think my answer for you is actually a return question, which is, what is your brand? And if part of your brand is that you are an advocate for certain social causes, then are those two things misaligned? Right? So I think that's the question that I think we all need to continue asking ourselves. And I think it's worthwhile, and I actually have a little bit at the end to talk through with you about how to think about how do you define yourself? How do you define yourself in this mixed area of personal and professional? What are the parts of you that you feel like are driving your personal brand that are not necessarily just job related? And do those things that you're interested in and that you would want to post content about really misalign? Did we have someone want to jump in or ask a question?
No, she's.
So I think let's continue that conversation as we go through, because it is a really difficult gray area, right? And I think that there's a lot of fear sometimes that we need to hide, or we have to somehow have a completely different persona for our professional selves and for our personal selves. I do think there are some sacrifices that need to be, right? If my personal persona is, I don't know, a festival going, Coachella person, but my professional self is miles away from that, I need to kind of think about what balance am I trying to strike in my life, right? And then what are the appropriate platforms that I'm using for each of these? So one thing that I would suggest is, especially if you're in a business like a product-driven business where you use Instagram a lot as a marketplace or as a platform for marketing, absolutely you should have a separate professional account and a separate personal account. And that's something that I've also seen people do with Facebook, even having different LinkedIns, just to sort of build one persona out completely and have a separate spot for something else. But with what you're saying, I'm curious, I think one is knowing your audience, knowing who is going to actually, everything is public, right? But knowing who you're posting that for and considering that. And then really using your judgment and thinking about very, very deeply about how you're defining your own personal brand to even draw the conclusion whether or not those things are misaligned. Because how you explained it to me right now and is exactly how you could explain it in a post, and that makes total sense, bridging your professional brand with these causes that you're passionate about. Being passionate about certain causes is something that also can be a huge strength and be seen as a big positive by a recruiter. Yeah, so we'll continue that conversation, because that's the $1 million question, right? How do I determine what's controversial, what's not, and if it goes along with my brand? Part of that, I think, is because a lot of us don't sit down and actually think very strategically and very in depth about what our brand actually is, until we're trying to figure out, well, how do I put my best foot forward for this particular position or opportunity, right? But this is a conversation that I think we need to start having with ourselves earlier and have with ourselves all the time, especially right before we're about to post something. That makes sense? Okay.
By the way, developing your personal brand is one of my future topics.
Yeah. Excellent. So this is a huge question that I get a lot, and I'll tell you a little bit of background. Both of my parents just recently retired, and if you can't tell from me, they're very energetic people, and so neither of them are really ready to retire. So they came to me and they said, "Christina, we heard about this LinkedIn thing. Like, what do we do? How do we get involved?" And so I actually did a webinar with my parents recently on how to create a good LinkedIn profile. So I'm going to go through that today. This is not super relevant to you guys. Let me know. We can talk about other platforms that you utilize. This is a question that I get all the time from job seekers, from people seeking career counseling, and all walks of life, right? I've worked with high school students on creating LinkedIn profiles, and I've worked with retirees on creating LinkedIn profiles. So I actually have a good friend who is a recruiter for LinkedIn, who you might recognize this photo. He's actually used for the LinkedIn ads. And so he allowed me to use his profile as a good example of certain elements that are really important to creating LinkedIn. And the reason I'm dialing in so much on LinkedIn, we had this conversation before people joined online when we were sitting in the room, is that there's some debate over which social media platforms are dying and which social media platforms are continuing on pretty strongly. And the talk we were having was about Facebook specifically. And Janelle, I believe your kids were saying parents ruined Facebook, which is a little bit true. Facebook is, at least for millennials onward, it's not as relevant a platform in a lot of ways. And for job seekers specifically, LinkedIn is really where your resume is moving. But what's great about LinkedIn is that there's so much more flexibility for creativity and for your voice
those aspects of you that go beyond your skills and experience can really shine, and you can convey that to a recruiter. You can convey that to other people that you're interested in connecting with. So we'll get into the profile, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to use LinkedIn specifically for that holistic networking that I was talking about. Any questions before we dive in? Okay, so hugely cannot underestimate how important it is to have a professional looking photo for your LinkedIn. Professional looking meaning if you're taking it with a cell phone, it has to be a new iPhone that has really high res photos, right? Because that's the first step. Think about that as really your representation in the world. If you have like a poor quality photo, that kind of implies that you're sort of out of touch, to be honest. So it's really, it sounds really silly, but it's so important to have a good photo. And when I say good, I don't mean you need to look good in it. We all are going to look good, but it's about having like a professional, high quality, high resolution photo. Mm-hmm.
So if you're like me and you don't have the best hair or not as handsome as like is there any professional thing, or maybe you can catch me if I have like a slight Photoshop version of myself, slightly, or like
ethically, do not Photoshop your photo beyond recognition. One, that defeats the whole purpose, right? And also, you know, I've seen profiles where people have a photo that's not of them, like, yeah, an animal, something like that, and that's not really appropriate for this one. Again, like I said, it's not about how you look. It is really about how you're presenting yourself, right? So you don't have to look great. You don't need to Photoshop contour or do anything like that, right? You want it to look like you. That's why you want a high resolution photo. So I can see your LinkedIn profile and then meet you in person and know it's the same person, right? That's the point. More so than having a glamour photo shoot for your LinkedIn. So you don't need to do that. Like I said, you can take it with a phone, but it's got to be a high resolution photo. Also on LinkedIn, you have the option to add a cover photo. So similar to Facebook, that sort of top banner, that will help your profile look more polished and professional. A lot of people underestimate the importance of these two things, but they will set you apart, they'll grab attention. They also show that you're savvy enough to know to change these things and to have high resolution photos. So it seems like really small and significant details, but they do make a difference. Also, on LinkedIn, you have your headline. Now, in the past, a lot of people think this is just your job title, but it's not. You can call yourself whatever what you're aspiring to be. Again, within the within the bounds of ethics, right? So I can't say I'm the CEO of FAMA when I'm not, right? But get creative with your headline. This isn't necessarily your job title. This is sort of how you would define your brand. Again, if I were to ask you, Pam, what is your brand in one word? How would you describe yourself and what you do? I'm putting you on the spot. That was a rhetorical question. Smart. Right? Smart. Energetic. And so this is sort of your tagline. So don't think about it as this has to be my job title right now, but your tagline. So what is it that you do? So for example, my friend Trey, he is a recruiter for LinkedIn, but he's defined a talent partner, a diversity champion, and a women's veteran, right? So all of these are not his actual job title, right? But these are functions that he serves, that he wants to put forward. That's part of his brand. Okay. Any questions about the tagline, about the headline? That's the first thing that recruiters are going to see. So if I'm searching for, let's say I want to fill the role of a UX designer, when I look at someone's profile and I see UX designer, okay, that tells me nothing. I already know I'm looking for that. But if I see someone who says innovator, you know, and has a couple of different really specific things in their headline, I'm going to be more interested and I'm going to read more about them. Less.
UX.
Oh, user experience. I was just throwing out an example of it. I'm hiring right now for a UX designer, so it's on my mind. And so, in addition to the headline, there's a piece called the summary. Now, this is something that often is compared to the objective section of a resume, and a lot of people don't fill this out unless they're actively seeking for a job. I would discourage that. in my opinion, the summary is basically you getting to sum yourself up and show your personality, show your experience in a very creative form right here. So instead of the bulleted, the pretty rigid form of a resume, your summary is where you get to sum up what you're looking for, who you are, and really put yourself out there. This is almost like the tell me about yourself section of an interview. So I would highly encourage anyone who doesn't have a summary, regardless of what your status is in terms of job seeking, that you have that there. One, because it's also kind of your introduction to anyone that you're trying to network with when you're using these platforms to network. And we'll get into that in a second. So as you can see, Trey's took a lot of creative license with his, and really is trying to promote his values about his actual position here. So his perspective on his professional field is what is coming across in his summary. And then down here, you also have the ability to tailor what people can contact you about in your LinkedIn profile. So as a non-job seeker at this point, Trey is inviting people to reach out to him for consulting and volunteering or joining a nonprofit organization. And so I think that that's really important too, to think about when, especially if you are an employer, letting people know what would be appropriate to reach out to you about. And that's something that you can tailor depending on your situation. So like I said, this is not something that's just stagnant and that you utilize when you are ready to move on to the next opportunity. This is a tool that you can constantly tweak and use however you want at that point for whatever you're looking for at that stage in your career. Any questions before we go to the next one? Okay. Is this helpful? I know that a lot of you are a lot more social media savvy, to be honest, than I was expecting walking in. What? Oh, the band at the top banner. Yeah, the cover photo. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you think about it, there's two pieces to this, right? Oh, yeah. Rob?
Hey, Christina, just wondering, how do you, this is a technical question, how do you add that highlight section?
Your highlight section, if you go to your edit your profile, it is something you can edit right underneath your summary. Yeah. And Rob, you and I can chat offline. I can do a little tutorial. Pull up the parental webinar that I did. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, I will need that. Thank you.
So a couple of other, what I was about to say, there's two different aspects to this, right? There's content, but then there is this aesthetic visual piece to it that can't be underestimated. And so having a high-res photo, utilizing that space for the cover photo, and then additionally, you have the option in LinkedIn that you can put logos for every company that you work for. They actually have a database, so they can find your company. If you work for a small startup, like Fama, or or a company that you're starting, for example, I highly encourage you to input or upload your logo and use that as well, because that legitimizes your experiences and aesthetically lends a more professional look to your profile. And I can't undersell how important that aesthetic look is. So definitely use the logos when you can, because that just really helps to visually make your profile look more professional. And also legitimizes you, because if you tell me you work at your own company and there's no logo for it or anything like that, I'm going to wonder what that really is, right? Is that just you alone in your basement? What is that? This is thinking about when Facebook first came out. There was this idea that if you didn't have a Facebook, you didn't exist, right? In college, it was kind of the joke. At this point, if you don't have a logo as a company, that's something that you should work on right away if you're starting your own company. And that you would want to demonstrate your LinkedIn, again, to legitimize that experience. And so this is an example. This is how Trey has his experience. I have this piece up here: make a choice and stick with it. Consistency is key. What I mean by that is not everybody wants to write out sort of in the story narrative form that Trey's using. For example, in my experience, I don't have any descriptors. links. I just have links to projects that I accomplished for every position that I was in. And that's a choice that I made, one, because I didn't feel like writing out a description. And that is fine. You don't have to follow one form. There is a lot of forms that can work here. The key is sticking with that choice. So if you decide that you're going to write out in this more narrative form like Trey, your experience at one job, you have to do that for every point that's going to be on your profile. Otherwise, it again looks a little bit. It's the inconsistency lends itself to potentially looking unprofessional, or also, well, why did you describe something about that job but really quiet about the other one? I'm curious there what happened, right? Even if nothing happened and it was just, I lost the connection and never went back to my LinkedIn, right? So make a choice and stick with it. But I thought that Trey had a really great example of how to leverage this platform in a way that goes way beyond the traditional resume. So as you can see, he's really told the story of and narrated his time at each position in this active first-person voice. So that's something that you have the freedom to do on LinkedIn that you don't have the freedom to do on a one-page resume. So really utilizing this tool in a way that lends itself to your skills. If you're not a writer, if writing a narrative about yourself is something that causes you anxiety, you don't have to do it, right? But if it's something that you're open to and that makes sense for skills that you have and the experiences that you have, absolutely push this platform as much as you can, because it is that gray area and almost more of a creative lens towards your resume, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yes. I'm wondering if in that area you're better off with a paragraph like that, or the classic bullet points. Mm-hmm. Every resume writer tells you bullet points, bullet points, bullet points.
Right. That's, again, the beauty of LinkedIn, is that the bullet points, again, if you feel like, it depends on how you want to use your profile, I would say. I sometimes think that if the narrative is not going to really demonstrate those higher points, if you're someone that finds yourself when you're writing, maybe not really sure what are the main things I want to convey here, but I can do it in a list form, play to your strengths. If you're a better list maker than a paragraph writer, then write a list. The strength of the form that you're using really has to do with what aligns with how you are best telling your own story. So some people are storytellers. Trey is a storyteller. And that is the way that he can convey his strengths to someone reading his profile. Other people might not be as good storytellers. And my story is really, I'm better at summing it up in quick bullets. That's exactly how I work. So it really has to do with what your strengths are. That's a decision that is individual to you. But what's great about it is that when you are looking at two different resumes or two different LinkedIn profiles as a recruiter, I don't have a preference for the story or the bullet points. I'm looking at the information they're conveying and the personality that's coming across. So if you're going to use bullet points, I highly, highly emphasize that you would want to have your summary written out in a way that conveys your personality. Does that make sense? Because then I can see your personality at one point and then boom, 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 go quickly through all of your resume experience. If you are, if you're someone who more successfully can convey your personality and those main points together in writing, then absolutely use a more creative form that allows you to get your voice heard. In a profession like recruiting, where so much of your brand is your personality and demonstrating that you can have a conversation with anyone, like my friend Trey, then that narrative form makes a lot more sense, right, for him to use and showcase his personality in that way. Because that's part of the skills that he's bringing to this field. Any questions about that so far? That was a great question, Beth. And so that brings me to this showing versus telling. Right? Some people can show really well in their narrative prose. Some people need to just show in other ways. So in addition to these bullet points, I want to emphasize the importance. Another great thing about LinkedIn that goes beyond the traditional paper resume is that you can link media to your profile. So like I said earlier, I've worked as a consultant. The point of that is that I've gotten to do really cool projects that I can't just talk about in one bullet point, right? So I have links to articles about those projects, to press releases about those projects, to videos of me speaking, things like that are huge things to link to your LinkedIn. So anytime that you're written about, or anytime that you are speaking for the Yale Club, or anytime that you're doing something in the world that resonates with the brand that you're putting out, capture it in some form of media and link it to your profile, or have a link from your profile to it. Because that is another way to have a bullet point that is a lot more illustrative than just something that you write on your profile. Less.
If I realize this is your resume, if I have something like a post, or I like somebody's post, or I share it in different, and I'm excited about this, does that end up like going away after the event? How does that work for things that like?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So LinkedIn functions a lot like Facebook now, where you have a feed, and someone can see, in addition to your profile, I can see your activity. So it will show up just like a Facebook feed. So I'll be able to see, if I'm looking at Wes, okay, I've read Wes's summary. Wow, he seems like a really, really cool guy. And then I go down and I can see, oh, he's going to this event. So he's kind of like, what that will convey to me too, depending on what you're posting in your content, is that you're putting your money where your mouth is, basically. So I'm looking at the things that you've posted and the things that you've liked, and how that's fitting into the brand that you are presenting in your profile. If that makes sense. So they are very linked. I'm not sure if that would work. Oh, I see. Okay.
The Eventbrite will say the event has ended, but the description is still there.
Exactly. So the post lives on.
And that's just beautiful thing. So, and I liked these events a week ago, and it showed up every week itself.
Yeah.
And the photo of it, and it's images.
I think one assumption to just operate under is that once something is live online, once you post something online, it's there forever. Just assume that. And I think that might put Ben out of business. Or get them better business. Yeah, so when you post something like a link that might expire, the post will still be there. But when someone goes to click on that link, they might get an error message, right? But the actual content, so any information about or description about the event or what you said about it, will still live on. Sorry, I think I misunderstood your question. Okay. Any questions about this? So always thinking about how can you really show who you are in your profile. And that's something that is very individual. So there's no perfect formula. And who you are and what your brand is also can dictate some of those things. But one of the strengths of a platform like LinkedIn is the fact that it's interactive. You can have these links to things that you care about. You can have ways to demonstrate what you did at a job. For example, if there's a white paper written about it, or an article written about it, or if there's even a video of something. I've even seen, especially I work in user experience, right? So I work with a lot of creatives and designers, and a lot of people will have links from their social media platforms to portfolio pieces, or to an online portfolio, or to a different website. So as a therapist, I have my own website for my counseling practice, and I had a link to that for my LinkedIn. So basically, it's a place where you can collate all of the things that you're working on and all of your interests that align with your personal work. Yes.
Another question, maybe it's off of LinkedIn specifically. Can I write an article or a post, something like that? And then it goes online, so like YouTube, right? Things like that. You always have commercials.
Yeah.
I don't like necessarily, or how do you control what kind of commercial is associated with your post if you're posting on a platform instead of ever post on a platform?
That's a really good question. And I don't really have an answer for you because I'm not quite sure how that works, because I think that it depends on the platform, right? How much control you have over the sponsors and who's advertising on it. But if you send me a link, for example, to a YouTube video of you speaking about something, and the first thing that happens is there's a commercial for something that's not aligned with your brand. Is that the concern?
Right.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think what you can do as a poster is have a disclaimer in the description, like an asterisk at the bottom that says any commercial content is not affiliated with me or my brand, and that's one way to get around it. I think too at this day and age, it really depends on you, again, on your audience that you're sending that link to. As a millennial, I know at this point I will wait till I get to the skip ad thing, and then I'll skip the ad, and I will not associate that ad with the content that I'm seeing, because I know that it's coming from the site, because I'm experienced with YouTube. So I think that that's something that is sort of, most people know at this point, you know, like when you watch Hulu or something, you know that those commercials are not necessarily from the writers of the show that you're watching, right? So there is sort of this cultural piece of understanding and extrapolating those two pieces of information. But I do think that if that's a concern, that in your description of that post, you can have a disclaimer that says, I'm not affiliated with any of the commercial content that's being presented on the site. And that covers you. Ben, what do you think about that? Is that something that when you're doing a check, or in what FAMA is looking at, that might be negatively associated if you post on a free platform and that platform uses advertisers that are not linked to you at all? Could that content be somehow tied to you and to any search that would come up with you?
No, I can make this one, sorry to take on my headphones. This makes this one really simple. No, not at all.
Yeah. But I would say if you want to go the extra mile and have a disclaimer about that, there's no harm in having that, for sure. Okay. Next. Yeah. Oh, let's go back one. Okay. Yeah. So there's a couple of other really cool aspects of this platform that I also want to stress, and that are important not just for when you're seeking a job, right? And that's the skills and endorsement section. So similar to a resume, where you have the skills and expertise section, where you talk about, okay, despite all the things that I did, these are the skills that, or the additional qualifications that I have. In your LinkedIn, you have the section that's called skills and endorsements. And endorsements means real people basically writing a testimonial about, well, sorry, can I see that? Sorry, because now, thank you. Okay, this is about people actually seconding that you have these skills. So I can say that I'm a public speaker, right? But if nobody endorses it or nobody gives it a thumbs up and says, yep, I've seen her do it, then really I'm just making stuff up, right? So the idea behind the endorsement section is that when you have a skill, you can have people in your network endorse you for it, which is almost like they just second and say, yep, definitely, they've done this thing, I can vouch for them. It's really important to have endorsements. Why is it important? Well, like I just said, I could say that I'm a great tuba player, but if nobody's ever seen me done it, a recruiter's going to look at that and say, well, where is this? You know, where is this in her resume? How do I know? But if people who've worked with you can endorse the fact that you have certain skills, that's really huge in legitimizing what you're putting on your profile. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard of that. Well, part of it too is for, yeah, I think you can. I think you can do that in your privacy settings. I'd have to look into it to give you a specific answer on that. But I will pose this to you, just a way of thinking about it. sometimes you are not the best person. We're all not the best people at seeing ourselves, right? So sometimes you might have someone say, you know what, I think you're really good at this. And it's an aspect of your job or the way that you presented yourself that you've never thought about, but that's actually a big strength that you're not giving yourself credit for. So that's another strength of this endorsement section, is that people will work with you and can say, you know, Hannah presented at this meeting and I think she's a great public speaker. I'm going to endorse her for that. And you've never thought of yourself as a public speaker.
I have two tabs. No, this is the same.
Yeah, if you click on that.
What is the tabs?
Do more. Tab.
It's still
You might have to stop sharing.
no, that stops sharing this.
How can you add the highlights section? I think that was the question.
Yeah, that
I'm not seeing any other. Somebody on the line have a question and they want to just jump in because we can't access the chat right now. No? Okay.
This one. Yeah, it's
What was it? Oh, we're talking about endorsements. Yeah. Yeah, I would say welcome them unless it's something that you feel like conflicts with your personal brand. Right? Because, one of the reasons why recruiters ask for recommendations, right, or for references, is to see how you're perceived by other people. That's the world that we live in right now. That's why we're talking about social media, right? This is how we demonstrate, or this is sort of the new way that we can have some control over how we're perceived. So the endorsement section is almost like another check to that, where people can tell you how you're being perceived and what are your perceived strengths from the people around you. So that's one way to think about it. So Hannah, I hope that you haven't gotten any endorsements that you feel like are, really negative, because they shouldn't be. You don't really have the ability to troll people on this. So someone can't endorse me for, I don't know, something like illicit on LinkedIn. That's not an option that they have available to them. So when you're receiving endorsements from people, one, what I would say to be cautious about is, are these real people? Do I know them? Or is this maybe a fake account? So that's something to be aware of. But if it's a positive and it's a skill that maybe you haven't even realized or thought of yourself as having, that's actually really huge and kind of a compliment, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, so this brings me to the recommendation section, which is very similar, but these are things that people can actually write out testimonials for you. So you can, it's almost a living reference on your profile. And I would suggest having at least one recommendation from a past colleague, employer. It could even be a peer. But basically, this is sort of strengthening again and legitimizing all of the aspects of yourself that you're putting out there as part of your brand. Any questions about that?
What is the recommendation? So say, this is a hypothetical,
Yeah.
But say I went close to Donald Trump and recommended for something we did really great together, and then it turns out maybe there's some negative connotations with.
Is that possible?
How does that work? If like something, or I worked with somebody before, I thought I worked there. Different example.
Okay, yeah.
Example, can I take that recommendation, or
That's a really, really good question. I actually don't know if you can undo your own recommendations. Your profile, you can control what's shown. But in terms of if I recommend someone else, can I go back and take down my recommendation? That I don't know. I think you can do that. I feel like you should be able to.
Yeah, it's different.
But I would also just put it out there. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of steps you can take. I don't really know. I have to look into that for you. Does anyone know? Anyone on the line? Ben? Anyone know if you can delete a recommendation you give someone else on LinkedIn? Yeah, they turn out to be.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure if you reached out to LinkedIn support, they'd be able to answer that question pretty quickly, or a quick Google might tell us the answer to that one too. I don't know.
And where it says see that, it's actually where you see them and given them, you can edit that.
Okay.
So I would think
You should be able to do
yeah,
it.
but I'm sure you can go there.
Great question.
I'm sure you
It's a great question.
Okay, I have a question on the number of connections you have on LinkedIn. There's a myth that you should have that magic 500 number, so it says 500 plus. Should one try to connect to everybody you know, no matter what, no matter how long ago or what what their profile is, or should you edit it and curate?
That is a really good question. And I am of the opinion that the latter is the best approach. The reason is that using these tools, and I just, again, this is sort of how I counsel people. And there's different thoughts and opinions about this. The number of followers is important in the sense that if you have 2 followers on LinkedIn, that makes it, and you don't have a high resolution photo, and you have all of these other things that we talked about that are kind of like, is this a real person, right? Or is it a bot? Now the thing is that we also live in a society now where you can buy followers, and you can look illegitimate because you have too many followers. Right? So if you are, a librarian in the middle of Portland and you have 17 million followers, I'm going to think that's probably a troll account, right? So the number of followers is not something I would get hung up on. I think that the reason why we are using these tools is to build our own holistic network of support, and also promote our own brand in the sense that we're creating our work and life are so meshed at this point, right? We spend 75% of our time at work. So your personal self and your professional self are going to meld together. And I really think about growing your network as something that is to grow your own well-being and mental health in a lot of ways. So if 500 plus followers is something that you would have to do in a disingenuous way, then by all means, stick with the authentic way of doing it. Stick with whatever is authentic to you. And so curating it or not curating it, really what I hear is, do I strategically and thoughtfully use this tool to network, or do I just put things on blast and try to get a huge following to look more legitimate? I think the first approach is what I would recommend. I think that if you are, again, in an industry that uses social media, needs social media numbers to influence sales of a product, for example, that's a totally different strategy, right? And if we're talking about Instagram versus LinkedIn and the way those two things are used, then I think the answer might be a little bit more nuanced in that sense, right? So if my Instagram account to sell my artwork, I don't have one, I'm not an artist, but let's say that I sell artwork through my Instagram account, I might actually want to get as many followers as possible, regardless of the whole authenticity piece that I was just talking about, because that's how I'm going to sell my product. That's a different strategy than I'm putting myself out there as this blend of personal and professional and showing myself as a brand. I'm going to strategically and thoughtfully make connections with people that are going to enrich my support network, not necessarily try to put myself on blast and just have as many people in my network as possible. Because once you get to 500, 600, 700, how are you using that? How are you leveraging that? If the numbers itself are not something that you're really leveraging, then what's the purpose of doing that? So I guess the way that I would answer that, and I went on this long-winded explanation, but the way that I would answer that is, what are your goals? And how is your strategy in using your profile and growing your network aligned with those goals? Does that make sense? Was that a helpful answer? Okay. Wes.
I have a comment on that.
Uh-huh.
I have a big network, but also I like to meet the people or at least know they're real.
Mm-hmm.
There are bots out there who can see your connections. So out of respect for my connections to their privacy, I don't like to be accepted from the fact that I don't know where the person's from, I haven't met them in person, or I don't know that they're related to a lot of people that I already know.
Mm-hmm.
So they get bots going through your own
and influence an election. You know, you never know. What were you gonna have to do the question?
We're just looking at this stuff as you're talking about it, and like the connections with life, and you see that yourself and others.
Yeah.
And what can be the leader of your team.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I seriously, I literally like talking about stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I want to like kind of wrap up quickly. So I was going to have you guys all do this, but there's not enough time. So we'll just talk about this. So one of the things that is a little bit difficult, and Wes, you posed the question right from the beginning, and that is, how do I define my brand, and thus all of these things that come out of how I'm bringing myself to the world, right? And so this is a little starter activity that you can do on your own to kind of think about what is it that I really want to put out there in terms of who I am, what I'm looking for, and how to weave that into whatever style of profile I want to create. And so the first thing is, what are 3 skills that you don't have on your profile? And what I mean by that are, what are 3 things that you feel like were important to you, to your professional life, but maybe aren't something that you have listed out, right? And list them out for yourself. One of the reasons I help people do this is because it's so easy to just think about weaknesses. It's so much easier to think about what are the holes or the gaps, or what are things that a recruiter is going to look at it and throw me out for. And I like to always start with thinking about what our strengths are, because that makes us more comfortable to be ourselves, right? And when you start to think about yourself and the skills that you have, and these skills are not necessarily JavaScript, you know, or programming or coding or things like that, but, you know, I'm skilled at negotiating, or I'm skilled at making someone feel comfortable. Or, you know, think about this, and really, what are some skills that you feel like on a daily basis you use that make you an asset that you might not have explicitly stated anywhere in your resume? That ties into the next thing, which is thinking about what are 3 qualities that make people want to work with you. So when you think about some of the relationships you have in your workplace right now, and your workplace could also be, I don't know, if you're an independent contractor and you work from home, when you go meet with clients, what are 3 things that you bring to a room that are part of your personality, that are assets to you, that are strengths? Again, really, really strengths focused here. Because if you start building your brand from an area of the things that you feel like are weaknesses, and I will also put that in quotes because I think sometimes we problematize things that are not problems. But if you start building your brand from this area of how do I cover, how do I hide, how do I make up for these things that I think are weaknesses, that's not the best position to start off thinking about building your personal brand. Think about it from a very, very positive place. That's where we want to start. What do you like about yourself? What makes you someone worthwhile to be around? Because we all are worthwhile to be around for different reasons. So thinking about those 3 things and writing them out for you, it's a really, really worthwhile activity to sit down and do this with yourself. And then finally, what are 3 goals you have for your professional life? And that could be in your current position. That could be in general. By the time I've decided that I just want to retire and give webinars to my parents on how to make their retirement savings last, what are 3 things that I want to accomplish? And that might be specifically, I want to have this position and I want to work for this organization and I want to volunteer here. It could be, I want to meet someone who did XYZ and learn from them, right? So think about some goals that you have that are not necessarily the next job, but really holistically across my career. What are some goals that I have? And write those down for yourself, because that's where you really start defining what your brand is for yourself. It helps you understand yourself a little bit more. And then you can build your persona that you're going to put out to the world around these very, very positive strengths. Any questions about that? So I've gone way past our time. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, to you and Ben. So, do we have online audience questions? just unmute yourself and start talking. If you do,
The chat's not going to work, so
yeah,
just jump in.
or maybe we've addressed all of your social media questions. There's oh, okay. Oh, you can see it. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Does Lisa have her hand raised?
Herman.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, I just want to say I don't have other questions. I just want to say thank you. This was really helpful to have both of your perspectives on this. So really well spent time today. So thank you again.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. Any questions for Ben? We
Connect with Ben on LinkedIn.
yes. You can connect with Christina and Ben. We encourage people to do that. What I realized halfway is I forgot to hit the report button. So I am going to send the PDF of the PowerPoint to the registered participants, and then feel free to connect with Ben and Christina. And if you have any questions, they kindly left their email here, and you can email me. And we look forward to having you at our future events. If you have other ideas, please let us know. I'm going to send a 6-question survey to you guys so that you can give us some feedback. If